Hello, and welcome to the meeting, DDC Tips for Beginners. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll jump right into this. Okay, thank you for coming, everyone. So let's start with the agenda. We're going to go over essential terminology for double disc court at a beginning and intermediate level. We'll talk about the two most important throws. There are dozens out there, but you really can get by with only two basic ones. And then I'll cover the sequence of how to serve and initiate and attack. That's the most common sequence that starts every point, and it's important to understand those four basic throws in that sequence, so the four steps in that play. Then we'll talk about how you escape, and that means playing defense and how to avoid two discs coming in and how to avoid touching them simultaneously, which is what the game is all about. And then we'll cover how to practice by yourself, because a lot of times it's difficult to get four people together. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A. Okay, so to start with the terminology, we'll cover the serve first. This is step one in the basic four-step sequence. This will help you get used to my diagrams here. The next four slides look the same as this. So both teams start at the same time, and on ready 2-1 throw, they both have thrown disc one up in the air here to the opponent's court. Now the red player in these diagrams, the one on the front line facing each court, that's the player who made the serve. So as you see, disc one is inbound to both courts, and after serving, it's very important, player one has to move to the middle of the court so that he can defend against a possible burn shot from coming back from the opponent after they catch the serve. Now what that means is that the server's partner, which is the dark figure in both of these diagrams, that person has to follow that blue dash line and go to the back of the court, typically, to catch the opponent's serve, which is coming in. So the basic rule is, it's an unwritten rule, but it's a good guideline to follow, that the non-server on each team is the one who has to be responsible to catch the serve that's coming in. All right, let's move to the next step. That's easy enough. So now let's see what happens after that. Now, when you get to a play in DDC, whenever there's a situation that's called an impasse, where both teams are holding a disc and not choosing to throw, well, then the responsibility to throw goes to the team that has the initiation responsibility. That's called the team that is designated as the initiation team. So it's sometimes called you have the des, or it's your initiation. Those are the ways you'll hear that said. Now in this diagram, the team on the left is throwing disc two because team on the left had the initiation responsibility. That means they won the last point. So they have to they're designated to throw first in an impasse. So what happened was the team on the right, when they caught the serve, the player there holding that disc one, he simply stood there and waited and looked at the other team. He doesn't have to do anything. He can just look at them, and that means it is the team that has thrown disc two, it's their responsibility to throw. Therefore, team that's holding disc one can just wait, and that's what you want to do. You want to wait until that disc two is inbound and it's coming to your team. So on the left here, after throwing disc two, that player who threw the initiation is supposed to move up to the front line, because you always want to be covering your front line when you're not holding a disc. You want to move up. Then over here, again, when you're going back to catch that disc number two, you don't want to get in front of your partner who's holding disc one. So that's one of the tricky plays that you have to watch out for in DDC, and we'll cover that again a little bit more later. All right, now we come to the next step in the sequence, where you're going to throw the lead shot. So step three is the lead shot, which is thrown by that player in red. Now that player in red is the same one who caught the serve number one at the beginning of the game, beginning of the point, and disc two is now being held by his partner. That was the initiation shot. So right before the player caught disc two, the red player threw the lead shot, disc three, okay? And then right after throwing it, what does that red player do? He has to come up to the front line. It's very important to always move to the front line after you've thrown your disc. Now, the back player over here on the left, is going to play the lead shot. Well, who's the back player? Well, let me explain. You and your partner have to decide before the game or even before the season which one of you is going to play back all the time and which one of you is going to play front. So we call the defensive team has what's called a back player and a front player. It doesn't apply during offense. It only applies during defense. So the back player is the one who always plays the lead shot. Now this disc 3 coming in is called the lead shot because the player holding disc 2 over there is about to throw the attack shot on the next slide. All right, so if let's say you're going to play back, if you're going to go back to catch number 3 and play back, then that means the other player has to come up to the front to play the front. Okay, so we'll explain that a little bit more as we go along here. Now, here's the attack shot. So disc 3, which was the lead shot, is still inbound, going to that back player on the left top corner there. And now disc 4 is the attack shot. That's the final step in this opening sequence where the player in red over here on the lower right has thrown number 4 and now has to move up. Let's say that that player is the front player on that team and get ready for defense on the next play. So even though they're on offense at this instant, they are getting ready for the fact that the defensive team might play 3 and 4 successfully. They might escape. It's called escaping if you successfully defend against an attack. So if they do successfully defend and escape, then the red team over here, which was on offense right now, is going to have to be on defense in a couple of seconds. So the red player who just threw the attack shot, let's say that he's the front player, he has to move up to the front line and get ready for that. Okay, so now you got disc 3 and 4 inbound to the team on the left. Before we talk about how they're going to handle that, let's just go through the sequence once more. We got the serve. Both of those are being called disc 1 in my diagram here because they happen simultaneously. Then we have the initiation shot. Then we have the lead shot. Then we have the attack shot. So that 4-step sequence is basically repeated on almost every play. Okay, now let's talk about the throws that you need. You know, there are dozens of throws. Some players have over 50 throws, but you really only need 2 if you're just starting out. So the first throw you need is a backhand hyzer, which I'll show like this. So righty backhand, and when I release it, I want the lower edge of the disc that's away from the top where my hand is gripping. I want that lower edge tipped down to the ground. If it was tipped up, that would be called anhyzer. But the most common play and the most reliable is to throw hyzer. You have to remember that these DDC discs are very understable, so they have to be thrown with hyzer most of the time. Now you're going to use this 90% of the time. You're going to use this hyzer backhand. You throw a serve, you throw it on the serve, you throw it on the initiation, the lead shot, and even when you're escaping, you want to throw it as a lead shot there too. Now, why do you use this all the time? Because it's so reliable and you can curve it up and around the front line to the back half of the court. That curve shot to the back half of the opponent's court is the single most important thing you need to learn about DDC. You never want to throw a flat flip fly straight like in ultimate golf or freestyle. You don't want to do that kind of flat shot that just goes straight across to the other team because that's headed straight for the back line. And if it's got a certain height and speed on it, it'll just keep going right out the back. But on the other hand, the curve hyzer, the way it curves into the court, it has better geometry working for it. And it can stick in the back half of the court. When it's coming parallel to that back line, it's not tending to go out the back as easily as a flat shot. So you got to learn to throw that hyzer curve shot up over their hands when they're standing on the hand with their hands up on the serve, let's say. Your shot has to go over that. So that means you need it to be at least 3 meters high or around the front corner. Okay? Excuse me, let's go back to that again. Now, what's the next throw you need to know is the hammer burn. A hammer burn is gripped with a sidearm, so thumb on the top. Now, for an upside down throw, a dream shot, not with a thumb but with a hammer, you would throw it like this, flat or above your head. But for a burn, you want to throw it about beside your ear. Now, if you have really good snap, you need to tilt it a little bit like this when you release it. So you might have to bend your head a little bit. Like this is how I do it. I kind of turn it like that. On the other hand, if it's a really hard wind or if you're not getting a good snap on the disc, you might have to release it very vertical. So right beside your head, if you're almost throwing it vertical like this, like a sidearm roller, for example. Okay, so you're going to have to experiment. To throw a hammer burn, you want to learn how to throw it either vertical like this or a little tilted this way a little bit, or even flatter like that, because you want it to go across and stick in the other court. So that is used for the attack shot most of the time. All right, those are the two throws. Well, when we talk about the wind, now you're going to see that I lied. You don't need only two throws. You really do need maybe one more, okay? So let's go over this. In this diagram, I'm throwing a right-handed backhand hyzer for my serve or my initiation shot or my lead shot. As I told you, that's the most common throw 90% of the time. Now, 3 out of the 4 wind directions, that works out fine. You see, if the wind is coming left to right, as I'm facing my opponent's court, it's pushing down on the flight plate as I throw this righty backhand hyzer, and that's very good. That pushes it down into the court. And if the wind is coming straight at me, or if it's going from my back towards the other court, in both of those situations, the righty backhand hyzer still works. But the problem is when you get into the wind coming this direction, it gets underneath the disc and it acts like a sail, and it lifts the disc up and carries it all the way out of the court on the other side, as you see here in the bottom diagram. So what can you do if you can't throw that righty backhand hyzer? Well, I'm going to give you, and that's, by the way, only in a really strong wind. If it was a light right to left wind, you can still get by with the righty backhand hyzer. But in this diagram, you see how I've drawn the wind direction arrow very, very thick. That means we've got a lot of wind here going right to left. And in that case, you're risking that the sail catches under the disc and just takes it out. So here's 6 options that I'll give you. And there are probably many more that you can think of depending on your repertoire and how you like to play the game. The most common technique is, until the wind gets really strong, you switch from throwing, say, this much hyzer to tilting it a little bit more like this. But you got to watch out, because you can't throw it at an illegal angle. Remember, the angle of the disc has to hit the other court at 30 degrees, which is about like this. So you cannot throw it like this. This is 50 degrees. That's illegal. And some players say, well, you know, it's windy. We have to do it anyway. I say, no way, because where do you draw the line? You may think it's 50 degrees is okay in the wind, but then why don't I just do it at 60, 70, 80, 90? Every angle, every degree that we take above 30 gives us an advantage as the thrower. It makes the disc harder to catch, and it stops instantly in the spot where it lands. So where we've drawn the line in the rule book is 30 degrees. It applies to everybody universally under any wind condition. And you may say, well, Scott, yeah, but that doesn't work. It's windy. We can't play in 30 degrees. Well, then you're going to have to learn how to do any of these other options, but you just can't do it. You can't say, well, it's windy, I'm going to go out here and throw 45 degrees. That's no good. Now, sometimes you might start out at 45 degrees, and if you've got a little headwind with these unstable discs, it might flatten out as it's going, and by the time it lands, it might be under 30. That's good. That's fine. Okay, another option is to throw a righty upside down hammer. So that's releasing it above your head with a hammer grip like this, which is a sidearm grip, but with a hammer kind of throw. Or option 3 here is to throw an hyzer. Now, Mark Horn is really good at this shot, and he knows how to curve it into the opponent's court with an anhyzer throw. And again, there the wind is pushing that down, but that's a tricky throw. It's hard to learn how to get that just right without it turning into a roller. Or option 4 is to throw a righty sidearm. Now, if I release this sidearm here, again, that flight plate is being pushed down by the wind. That's good. Okay. Option 5 is to throw a lefty backhand hyzer. And again, it's being pushed down by the wind. That's good if it's a right to left wind. So you might say, hey, Scott, I'm not lefty. How do I do that? Well, it takes thousands of practice throws, but eventually you can get it. It turns out, I wasn't lefty either, but I learned how to do it in DDC by lots and lots of practice. Because you're locking in that hyzer angle, it's not a super talented throw to learn how to play lefty. And many of the top DDC players have learned how to do that. Other players like Harvey and David Taylor, they like to use a sidearm for that. Or another option, if it's really windy, you can try and burn on the serve, because maybe you say, you know, it's so windy, 20 miles an hour wind out here, we can't get anything in the opponent's court. Well, in that case, you might as well just try and burn. Try your best to just get it in somehow. Okay, now let's go over some typical tips, standard tips for playing the serve and attack. And if you can get all of these incorporated into your game, you will be an intermediate DDC player just like that. So this isn't really that hard. You just got to learn to memorize these 6 steps. First of all, when you're serving, you want to look both right to your left. Make sure that there's even space on both sides of you in case your opponents burn on the serve. You want to be prepared to catch one on your between you and the line, the sideline, and between you and your partner. The next thing is, as I said before, you have to get your serve around or over your opponents. Even if they are jumping up to catch it on the serve, you want to make sure it goes over that or around the side of them and curves into the back half of their court. That is the most important thing about DDC. Never throw flat flip flies straight. You got to curve that to the back half. And then after serving, you don't just stand still. You got to be paying attention. You need to move to the middle of the front line to be ready in case they burn back at you after they catch your serve. Step 4 here, the non-server has to catch the opponent's serve. Now, if it's thrown, if their serve comes directly to you and you're the server, well, you can catch that, of course. You can jump up and grab it. But otherwise, your partner is supposed to catch their serve that's coming in because you're busy concentrating on your serve and you're kind of out of position for that. So your partner is more mobile in that situation. Now, step 5 here, when you're running back to catch the initiation throw, let's say your partner caught the serve and it was the other team's initiation. They initiate into your court and you're going back there to catch that disc. You have to avoid blocking your partner's lead shot. There's 2 ways you can do that. Either he can throw it early and get out of your way, or you see that the disc is headed right for him and you go around behind him somehow to catch it. One way or the other, you got to figure out how to avoid kind of blocking him or crashing into each other. Now, the next thing is really important. You have to wait to throw the lead shot until just before your partner catches the initiation. Let's say you're standing there holding the serve, you caught their serve and you see the other one coming in. Do not throw your Frisbee yet. You wait. You wait until your partner is about to catch the initiation. Now, right then is when you're going to throw the lead shot. And you want to throw that early enough so that you don't crash into your partner who's coming back into that same area to catch their initiation. But you don't want to throw it too early because you need to have enough time on your throw that he will be able to catch his disc, turn around, aim, catch, see where yours is in the air, and then throw his shot and have it travel all the way across to the opponent's court so that it gets there at the same time as yours. So in order to allow all that to happen, you want to throw your lead shot just barely before he catches his, but not too close, okay? All right, now that I've said all that, let's go through the next 3 slides of the same design here, but I'm gonna ask you to make the call. Every team should know who's gonna play front and who's gonna play back on their team. Now, the back player should generally be a fast decision maker, and the front player should generally have good hands and maybe be able to dive right and left and catch a burn that's coming in. So in these 3 slides, I'm going to ask you to be the back player over here on the left side. You're on defense, and you've got disc 1 and 2 inbound, and you have to figure out what you're going to do. So remember, the defensive team has to figure out how to play both discs without touching them simultaneously. Obviously, the easiest way to play back is to say one of these discs is going out. If it's not going to stay in your court, you can just call hold. So let's say instead of catching disc 1 or 2, one player sees that, you know what, I don't know for sure that it's going out, but I know I'm not going to touch it. So in that case, you just call hold, and that tells your partner to catch his and don't throw it back. But let's say that in this case, you see that 1 and 2 are both coming in your court. You got to figure out what to do. So what's your call? Well, I would say in this case, you're going to say, I'll throw, and then you say off. Now, every team has a slightly different form of communication style, and that's up to you to figure out your signals. This one works for a lot of people. The reason that you're going to say, I'll throw, is because you can see that disc 1 is really close to that back player, and disc 2 has only just started out. Now remember, disc 2 is typically a burn and it's coming fast, but in this case, disc 1 is almost here. So the back player over here on the left on the defense team can just reach up and grab it perhaps, unless it's still floating up pretty high and slow, but probably he can reach up and grab that one and even hang on to it for a second or 2 while he's looking at disc 2 coming in, and he can throw it just before his front man is going to catch disc number 2. So that would be the typical play here in this scenario with these 2 discs at this speed and at typical speed and at this position. You would say, I'll throw, and then off. Off is the key word that frees up your front man to catch his disc. He's not supposed to touch disc 2 until he hears you make a call like that, okay? So now let's change up the scenario. Here the discs are in a different position. What is your call on this play? We've got disc 1 that's pretty close again to the back player, and disc 2 is more than halfway across. And remember, it's probably coming fast because it's typically thrown as a burn shot. So what do you say here? Well, most likely it's a good play to say tipping. So the back player very often has to tip because this is a very common scenario that you're looking at here. The reason he can do that is if he tried to catch that disc and hold it and make a quick throw, that typically takes about 1 to 2 seconds of holding time. He's going to be in contact with the disc for over a second to do that. But if you tip it, you're only in contact with the disc for maybe 1/10 of a second. Therefore, you tip it up over your head. So let's say it's upside down and I tip it up. Now it's going to float up over my head and I'll catch it again right before it comes down to the ground. So that means it's going to be in the air for about 2 seconds. During that time, my front man is going to catch that disc number 2 and throw me a lead shot to go back to the other team. So tipping is a very common call. Sometimes you'll say tip right when you hit it. Other players say tipping, and then that means listen for the sound of the plastic. You'll hear it 1 second after I say tipping, or right after I say tipping, you're going to hear a bang like that. And that means you go right then, okay? So the front player cannot touch his disc. He has to keep milking it, maybe running a little bit back in the back of the court until he hears that tip. Okay, here's the final template that I'll show you. Now, what do you do in this situation? Here, we've got similar to the previous play. Disc 2 is more than halfway across between the courts, but disc 1 is not here yet. So in this case, the back player cannot tip it. He can't reach it yet. What should he do? One thing he can do, now this is not always done, but he could say, you tip. Or another thing he does is he just says, go, which tells the front player, do whatever you can, but you're up first. So if he says go, the front player says, okay, I got to do something really quick on my disc 2. Well, one option is if it's high enough over your shoulder, the front player can tip disc number 2. But what if disc number 2 is really low down at the knees? That's hard to tip. So in that case, the front player has to try and execute what's called a quick release, a quick catch and throw. But sometimes the back player can see how high that disc is, and if he sees that it's already shoulder height coming into the front player, the back player can just say, you tip, because that'll be nice. Then the front player will be catching his own tip on the front line. That's a good position to be in. But what if the back player says, you tip, and then front player says, wait a minute, it's too slow. I can't even get to it yet. It's not even here yet. It's taking its time. Maybe it's wobbling, coming over. So the front player can tell the back player, no, you tip. Now, this is not a beginner play here. This is getting into an advanced play, but it does happen sometimes, and it actually works quite well when you pull it off. So I just wanted to open your eyes to some of the variations that happen, and you can be ready for that. You got to be tricky sometimes to adjust for the timing. Okay, finally, I'd like to wrap up with advice for how you practice when you don't have 4 people. A lot of times you don't get 4 people together. So you need to have 10 to 20 discs. Let's say you go out by yourself and you're going to practice your burn shot. Now, how do you don't have to set up the whole court. So how do you do it? What I do is I just put a bag on the ground about 17 meters away, and maybe my other shoe or something like that, my extra pair of shoes, I use that to make a line on this side. So I've got a couple shoes and a couple bags on the ground making 4 front corners. I don't need the sidelines and the back lines. I can just estimate it. So you practice your burn shot where you're going to try to put that in to land it right beside your bag, but not touching it and not in front of it so it's short. So in other words, if you could land that disc every time about 1 meter or 2 meters away from your bag, you would be pretty darn good. And that's what you want to practice with your burn. Another thing you can do is practice your deep serve, which you also use for initiation shots, and you also use it for throwing lead shots. So practice that hyzer. Now, if you got a crosswind, you also want to go on the other side and practice that sidearms or throwing it lefty. So one way or the other, you got to learn how to get a deep initiation shot with a hyzer throw from both sides of the court in either wind. Okay, what if you have 2 players? Well, then you can play catch and invent games. what I like to do with my partners, we throw burns at each other. So one player has a stack of 20 discs, and he just burns each one after the other to the partner who has to catch it one-handed. So it's like a guts practice. Another thing you can do is front tipping and back tipping. So let's say I'm going to play front. My partner can throw all the burns at me, and I have to try and practice getting under it with two hands. You make it like a V shape here with your hands. You can't touch any two opposite sides of the disc simultaneously. So this would be an illegal tip, but this would be a legal tip where I've got one hand underneath and one on the side to block it, okay? So you practice front tipping, and you can do back tipping as well. And let's see. You also throw deep initiation shots to each other. This is a fun game. You just play with two discs simultaneously. So you each stand in the back half, and you both throw a big curving, and then you just keep cycling like that. As soon as you throw one, you go and catch where the other one is coming in. And when you get there and catch it, you throw it back in the other way. And you just are sort of juggling two discs. And it's a lot of fun to play that because you can do like, 100 throws in a very little time. All right, now let's say you get 3 players. This is fun. Now, one player gets the stack of discs on his side, and he holds 2 discs simultaneously. You got to have them both in your hands ready to go. So first you throw a lead shot, and as soon as you throw that lead shot, you get the other one ready for the attack shot. So you grip it in a hammer, let's say, and you wait until the timing is about right, and then you throw the attack shot. So now the other team who's practicing their defense has 2 discs coming in, and the back player has to practice making the decision and tell his partner to tip or what have you. And then after you do a stack of those, you can rotate the players. So everybody gets to play back and everybody gets to play front. And after a few stacks, you can switch for the wind direction. Okay, so that wraps it up. I see there are no questions in the queue right now, so I want to keep this brief. And you can always email me questions or post them on the DDC group on Facebook. Thank you all very much for joining, and I hope you enjoyed the show.